Hi, Principal Matters friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, along with co-host Dr. Jen Schwanke. Before we jump into today's conversation, which is going to be an interview between Jen and Elena Aguilar, we just wanted to answer a quick listener question. So, Jen, here's the question.
Okay, I'm
How do
ready.
I identify the people that I can trust to support me or assign positions of management? And Principal Matters listeners, if it's been a while since you've listened to our show, or if you're new to our show, uh, I'm Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, and Jen Schwanke is the Deputy Superintendent at Dublin City Schools in Dublin City, Ohio. And you can listen back to more than 400 episodes prior to this episode. But we just wanted to take 5 minutes here to answer a quick question before you listen to this week's guest. So, Jen, this person is asking how to identify the people I can trust to support me or assign positions of management.
So you've asked a question about trust, and we're going to try and answer this in 5 minutes. Is
Mhm.
that true? I'm joking. Trust is so complicated, right? I read something not too long ago that said trust is like love. We don't know how to define it, but we know it when we feel it.
Mhm.
Trust is complicated. And I think for school leaders, and unfortunately, I think a lot of times we are trained to be distrustful or mistrustful of others. I know in my graduate program for my principal's license, there was a lot of talk about, don't trust anyone, don't be real careful. And I push back against that because I think that in order to trust and build trust, you have to be trustworthy and trust willing. I'm actually working on a new book for ASCD right on this topic. And I think trust takes time, and I think principals should go in with a lens of trust rather than mistrust, because
Wow.
others will sense if you don't trust them and they haven't even done anything wrong yet.
Yeah. Well, since you're writing a book on trust, I want to refer you to one I'm going to be studying with a mastermind this semester called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Mhm.
It's been out for a little while, since 2018, I believe. And what I love about that book is um, the whole concept of this book is that trust actually makes your work more efficient.
Mhm.
Because if you're constantly having to run your work through the filter of can I trust this person, or are
Right.
they trustworthy, or do they trust me, then it bogs down. It creates all kinds of layers. It creates more bureaucracy because most of the rules that we have on all of those hoops we have to jump through are placed there because of someone's lack of trust in the past. So let me see if I can answer this person's question directly, which is this: when you're looking at a staff or a team and you're trying to decide who can I trust to support me, you learn trust through experience. But what I love about what you said, Jen, is assume trust on the front end. And when someone violates that trust or proves themselves untrustworthy, then you pivot.
Right.
You begin to make decisions and um, moving forward that will hopefully place someone into that opportunity for trust who you know is reliable. What else do you
Right.
want to add to that?
I think it's risky to ever say that someone is not worth trusting, because then you'll just have two buckets of people, right? Those I can trust and those that I can't. And anyone who's in the bucket of can't trust is probably just made a mistake, or didn't know your expectations, or failed to understand the assignment or whatever. So I think it's important that principals be careful to write anyone off. And like you said, let's start with the lens of trust, and let's assume everyone does their best. And if someone really betrays you, yeah, put them in the don't trust bucket. But I think we also need to give grace.
Well, let me add one other thought, and that is this: that usually when I'm trying to weigh the reliability or trust of someone with whom maybe I haven't worked before, start small. And so I might invite them to a small task, or I might invite them to do something that I know won't require a huge amount of investment or time, but therefore I can kind of give them a trial to see how. And so I've read a lot of business books that suggest the same thing about hiring, which is when you bring someone on, before you make the big commitment, think about the small commitments, and that's not always possible within the school world and all the weird contracts that we do. That's one of the reasons a lot of schools, though, go to a 1 year contract with a brand new person just to see, can this person be trusted before they enter into a long-term agreement. So Jen, as we wrap up this little Q&A before we jump into this week's episode, I want to just add one more thought, and that is that we can't invite others to work with us in a trusting way unless we're trustworthy. And so we also have to be recognizing that they're asking the same question about us. And the best way to invite someone to a trusting relationship when you're assigning them positions and responsibilities is to be trusting.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, Principal Matters listeners, thanks for listening to our Q&A. And I know you're going to love this week's wonderful conversation between Jen and Elena Aguilar.
Thanks,
Thanks for doing
everyone.
what matters. We'll see you next time. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 413.
Hello, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke here, and I am so thrilled today to be talking with Elena Aguilar, writer, teacher, leader, coach, podcaster. Many of you know Elena, and that is partly probably because of her 8 highly acclaimed books. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to Elena and then turn it over to her. Does that sound good, Elena?
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Okay, so Elena has, as I mentioned, 8 highly acclaimed books, and she does a lot of work with coaching teams, emotional resilience with educators, and she has a new book coming out too, part of which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And that book is called Arise, The Art of Transformational Coaching. There's some pre-order bonuses that we're going to have you have access to in the show notes. Elena also has been a frequent contributor to Edutopia, ASCD's Educational Leadership Magazine, EdWeek Teacher, and Elena is the founder and CEO of Bright Morning Consulting, which is an organization committed to helping individuals and organizations create conditions for transformation. So those are all just words, Elena. Tell us what you do. Tell us how you're making such an incredible impact on teachers, leaders, coaches throughout our country and even beyond.
Oh, there's so many fun ways I could answer that question, but I think I'm going to answer what I do by saying I'll go from broad and perhaps more words to specifics. I'll say what I do is I speak to people's hearts and I speak to their minds and I speak to their hands. And so by hands, I mean, I give people concrete tools that they can use tomorrow, but I always speak to the heart and to the longing that we all have for connectedness and belonging, for purpose and meaning, for autonomy, for trust, for competence. Those are our core human needs. And when those core human needs are met, we thrive. And we thrive individually and we thrive in community with others. And as human beings, we are a social species. We want to be with others and we want to be together in healthy relationships and healthy community. And so all of my work is committed to helping people create more connection with students, with colleagues, with their communities. And going back to speaking to the mind and the hands, I give people specific strategies. I write about those specific strategies. I talk about them in my weekly podcast, and I teach them in the workshops that I present. What does this mean going from the words and the lofty ambition? And yes, we all want community to how do I do this? What can I say tomorrow when someone says X, Y, and Z? And I feel like, ooh, I don't know if you belong here.
Well, the reason I love that you give specific strategies and practical, actionable steps is you're right. We all say, well, I want community, I want relationships, I want connections, I want transformation. But if you don't know how to go about that, you need someone like you to come in to help guide through that journey. One of the questions that I always ask people is tell us about yourself and your journey as an educator. And here's why I ask it, Elena. So many people are maybe beginning their career, they can't picture this vision that you have created and such a great impact on so many educators. So how did you start? And what brought you to where you are today?
Okay, well, I'm like tempted to go back to like when I was 4 years
Right.
old. However, I'll just say that when I was 4 years old and I started kindergarten, that our experience as people and as students deeply impacts how we are as educators and leaders. And it's really important that we do that reflection, that exploration, perhaps that healing, so that who we are as teachers and educators is sort of the updated adult version, and that we learn from those experiences. So I can say I was born in England. I went to a school where I felt in my school, in my community, really isolated, alienated, and marginalized. And those experiences were both really difficult and impacted who I became as a teacher, which is someone committed to creating a community in which every child felt accepted and felt a sense of belonging. And that is also what informs my work as a coach. So I started teaching actually in the Salinas Valley in California, which is a very agricultural community, lots of migrant workers. And I was a substitute teacher. I was applying for graduate schools. I was going to go into the pathway of academia. I started subbing and loved it. I felt like this is what I want to do. I mean, if you love subbing, you know that that's a
Right.
call.
That is so true.
I was like, this is the best thing. I would leave school every day just feeling like I was just so energized and delighted. I dropped the graduate school applications and I went into teaching. And that was 30 years ago. I can't believe this is my 30th year in education. So then I moved to Oakland, California, and I was a teacher, a coach, a leader, and I worked in the Oakland Public Schools for 20 years. And in the last 10 or so years in the school district, I became a coach. And I was coaching new teachers, and I had been sort of trained a little bit in very traditional instructional coaching methods, but those didn't work when I wanted to talk about lesson planning and assessment and creating engaging strategies for middle schoolers. And the new teacher that I was sitting across from, who I was supposed to coach, could not stop crying.
Oh,
Was
right.
I am so overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. And I felt like I didn't have strategies to coach her. And the strategies that I tried, like here are the tissues,
Right.
let's open the curriculum guide. They just didn't work. And so I started reaching outside of, I would really say outside of the the common tool set in education at that point. I started reaching beyond into like, what are some other strategies I can use to support this teacher to respond to the strong emotions that she's experiencing, as well as to explore her underlying beliefs about herself, about students, about education, and then to shift behaviors so that she could meet the needs of her students. So that's an overview with
Right.
perhaps a few anecdotal insights thrown in there.
But here's why I think it's going to resonate with our listeners, Elena. Many of our principals that are listening today don't have coaches on their staff, and therefore they need to be the coach. And many principals don't know how to do that. And so they've all been in that moment where, the teacher's there crying, all they have is a box of tissues to offer and to say, hey, well, toughen it up. Yeah, the first year's hard. Sorry. And so I really want to park there. And by the way, Elena, one of my biggest weaknesses as a podcast host is I send you questions ahead of time and I get to about two of them because the human stories are what matter to me, right? And so many principals are probably listening right now saying, but how did you make that jump? And I'm assuming you were tasked or asked to be a coach because you were a strong teacher. Many times, though, strong teachers can't make that jump to walk in the shoes of the person crying, to understand how to help a teacher without bruising their confidence or making them feel less than. So tell me about that. How did that skill, how was it planted in you and how did it bloom?
I'm going to answer that, but I just want to validate that what you're doing with me in this conversation is authentic connection, and you're really listening and you're responding to what comes up. And this is transferable to a principal working with teachers. And so I'm just honoring, yeah, you gave me a bunch of questions and you're here with me and we're in this conversation. So when you are a principal and you've got a teacher sitting in front of you crying, be with the person. Yes, you've got a long list of things that you are supposed to talk to them about. Perhaps the tears erupt in an evaluation conversation and you're thinking, but I'm supposed to get through all of these elements, and be with the person. And that is a lot harder than it sounds, because we all have 85 things that we're supposed to do. And so what's hard is presence. And what's hard is trusting the process, trusting what is happening. What's hard is being with the person in their experience and knowing that a productive outcome is possible. So I think that how we get there, it's interesting because when I was a teacher and I had a student who would be really distressed and be crying a lot, I was able to be with them. I was able to respond compassionately, thoughtfully. I didn't just tell the kid, like, here's some tissue, get back to work. I would
Right.
crouch down next to the student. This was, I taught mostly middle school, but I also taught younger kids and high school students a bit too. But I would be able to crouch down and shift my voice, shift my tone, and say, what's going on? What do you need right now? How can I help you? Do you want to talk? Do you want to just some time by yourself? Do I was able to make those decisions. But when it was an adult, and yes, being a good teacher does not translate into being a good coach. There are transferable skills, but working with adult learners is a different skill set. And yes, we can use many of the strategies we use with kids and not all of them. And we need an expanded tool set. So there were a number of shifts that I had to make that included shifts in beliefs about emotions. So when I became a teacher 30 years ago, I'm sorry, I'm just in the like,
Yeah.
how is it possible?
Well,
Um,
that means you feel young. That means you still feel like you're just 5 or 6 years in. So that's good. That speaks to
yeah,
your energy.
yeah, it also means like mortality and lots of need for therapy and all of that.
Yeah, don't do the math. Don't do the math.
No, so but I mean, I do, one of the reasons why it's helpful for me to name that is because I recognize how much beautiful change has happened in 30 years. So 30 years ago, my principal, Mrs. Cook, she was a wonderful woman. She had been a principal and a teacher in that community in Oakland for so long. It was probably 2 months into the school year, and I had a student, he was a second grader, who was going through hell at home. And I was just flooded by overwhelm. How do I help him? How do I help my other kids? Just the magnitude of the need and the sense of responsibility that I had as a teacher. And there was one day when I was in the hallways and she asked me, so this is a woman who wore heels and nylons every single day. She asked me how I was, and I just lost it in the
Mhm.
hallway there. And I was talking about this student, and I was helping his mother I was going with his mother to lawyers to get a restraining order and go against the stepfather and to get her documentation, all this. I was just so overwhelmed. I was telling her all of this. And Mrs. Cook walked me to the door of the school, and she pointed at the entry line and she said, here's the only way you're going to make it as a teacher. When you get to school tomorrow morning, you leave your emotions outside this building. You do not bring them in. You leave them outside. And she was saying,
Wow.
fine. And I was standing and she was saying, that is and I was looking at her thinking, wow, well, you've been in this district, in this community for 30 years. You must know something. I just need to, yeah, toughen up, get emotionally just separate, leave it outside the door. And the messages that I got were, it's unprofessional to bring your emotions to school. Okay, here's the shift that I've made. Here's what I now understand. All the gratitude and honor to Mrs. Cook, and she did what she did, and she had a tremendous impact. And human beings have emotions, and we can actually learn strategies to be energized by them, to glean their wisdom, and to work with them, to manage them, to regulate them. We can learn those strategies. And now there are some schools, maybe many schools, that are offering young people social emotional learning. Most of the adults did not get SEL as children. Some of the adults, some of the teachers are told now teach SEL, but without any kind of training or experience. And I don't mean just implementing a curriculum. I mean with our own emotions. But we can learn these strategies. They're actually not that hard. And so, for example, for me now, when I'm flooded by sadness, I recognize that means I need to take some time to experience that sadness, to cry, to feel the feelings, to explore what they want to teach me, what they're telling me about my commitments, about love for young people, about my own hurt. And there are ways that I can respond to the distressed teacher that are both validating, affirming, empathetic, and that help them shift. But it requires that we slow down, which can feel really, really hard to do when we're in a situation in which there is so much to do.
Right.
Stop there because I just said a whole lot.
Well, you did. And I am still thinking about how you started it, which was, be with the person, listen to the person. And I don't think you're saying, let's all sit around and cry when things get hard. You're not saying that at all. But you're also saying, I can't discount the emotion piece. I can't leave that outside. And it's very interesting to me that when you describe your first principal, she was my first principal too. And I think it was a different time, especially for women who were principals. I think they had to be so incredibly tough, and they had to lead as if they didn't have the emotions they did. And so I am exceedingly grateful to lead in a time where emotions are understood to be drivers of behavior. And I agree with you. SEL, when someone says teach that, well, what does that mean? That'd be like telling me to teach welding. I know what it is. I know it's very important for structures, but I wouldn't know how to, weld. So we have to think about how when teachers, I love that you use the word overwhelmed. When people say that to us, what does that mean? And you mentioned listening. My most recent book about conflict management, people are saying to me, well, how do you manage conflict in school? And I say, listen, you have to listen, because so many times words are not, we think they mean something, but we're being told something else. And even when you were talking to me, Elena, your voice slowed, your tone changed when you were talking about working with students. And I think the key for coaches and principals who are successful with this is they are able to do that with authenticity. We can tell a principal or a coach, crouch down, be with them, listen. I've worked with principals or coaches before that do it as if it's a checklist. Okay, I listened. Okay, I said affirming things. Okay, I checked in. But if it's not real, it doesn't work. And so when you go around, you work internationally, when you go around and you work with districts, coaches, leaders, educators, what is your intended outcome in terms of getting them to understand the importance of presence, listening, connecting? Tell me a little more about that.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. IXL is research proven to benefit all student populations, including English language learners and special education classrooms. IXL is an all-inclusive online learning and teaching solution for K-12 that accelerates achievement, saves teachers time, and more. This one platform helps you accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically differentiates learning to help them master concepts at their own pace. Teachers get real-time insights into how students are performing so they can provide timely support. What I personally love about IXL are the personalized SAT and ACT study plans. Students just need to enter their most recent test score, and IXL automatically generates a custom list of skills they should work on to improve their scores. Discover what IXL can do for your school. Visit IXL.com/PM today.
Yeah, well, let's back up and start with that experience, that anecdote you gave of their what's going through their mind, what's going through our minds when we're listening. So, the first step to becoming a better listener is to cultivate awareness of what's going through our minds. And we'll just start there. So, we say, okay, I've got all these things that I want to say. Or, for example, I'll just tell you right now, I'm listening to you, Jen, and I'm thinking, like, oh, that's an interesting point. I want to come back to that. I want to make sure I'm really getting this. So, there's nothing, we want to move out of judgment and right and wrong. This is just the what is happening. So that's the first step, is awareness is what is happening. Then I would say the second step is maybe going a level deeper of what's underneath that. What's driving that? What are the emotions? And so sometimes, let's say a principal is listening to a teacher who is crying and distressed. Let's say it's an evaluation conversation, or it's a debrief of a lesson, or it's a stopping in the hallway. And the principal has 15 things that they're supposed to talk about or do in the 45 minutes. And then they've got another teacher coming in, then they've got a parent meeting, then they've got a committee meeting in this evening. And they're worried that if they don't get home for dinner on time tonight, their partner is going to lose it and their kids are going to be okay. So that is real. Then, so there's what's going on in my mind. Where is that coming from? What's that about? Then there's a really critical piece, which is having compassion for yourself. Again, not right or wrong, because then when you become aware that your listening is scattered, chaotic, you're not present, you have an outcome you're trying to drive to, sometimes we can get to the place where we start saying, like, I know that's not how I'm supposed to listen. Why can't I listen with presence? Elena says, here are all the ways to listen. Okay, so there's a kindness that we have to extend to ourselves. Wow, this is a really hard job. You are doing the best you can. You have a lot on your mind. And yeah, if you don't get home for dinner tonight,
You're in
okay,
trouble.
then it's the like, okay, but I'm going to get home for dinner. But then once the kids go to bed, I can work from about 9 to 11, and then I'll still get 5 hours of sleep. And because I got to get up and do my exercise and my meditation, and and so it is hard being a leader. It's hard being a human being. It's hard being present. And then we just come back to, like, okay, so how do we listen? One of the keys, I think, in terms of shifting our conversations, our listening, our schools, our community, is to have more experience of the emotions that feel good, of the kinds of states that we want to be experiencing.
Mhm.
When we experience those more often, we're more likely to let ourselves have them, to create the conditions in which we have them. When we're really listening, it feels really good. I find that deep listening to someone else, where my mind is quiet, I feel present. I don't have my own internal anxiety about we're not going to get to the outcomes. I love that feeling. It's blissful to me. It's like I mean, maybe that's why I love being a coach, is because I can listen to people and I find it incredibly pleasurable. And so when I notice that, it compels me to do more of it. Anything we enjoy, we're going to find the ways to do more of it. But there's a lot of ways to break down what it means to listen so that we can create more experience of it. And so you asked me about the intended outcomes. I'm looping back. I'm going to name all these multiple levels. More experience of joy and pleasure in our work, in listening, in connecting with another, in finding the strategy so that when that teacher is sobbing, you can be present with them without your own anxiety of what if they never stop crying? What if they don't come back tomorrow? What if I can't find a replacement for this teacher? What if my scores drop? What if you can be with that teacher and you can say, thank you for sharing that that this is hard. Thank you for trusting me.
Right, right.
What would be a helpful question for me to ask you right now? What are you hearing in what you're sharing? What are you learning about yourself? Have there been other times when you've felt this overwhelmed? So the outcomes are both really concrete, that leaders will learn very specific strategies, including sentence stems, such as, is there a question I could ask you right now that would be helpful? Two, on the other end, the transformed affective experience of, wow, it feels really good to be standing in the hallway right now, really present with this human being in their distressed moment, and be able to recognize that I'm not feeling the overwhelming anxiety inside of me. And I just feel good being of service.
Listeners, I know that probably what happened to you as you listened is the same that happened to me. I think my blood pressure went down just there in that moment, Elena, because again, your tone, the thoughtfulness with which you asked those questions made me want to answer them authentically and with thoughtfulness. And that's where we get some real movement, right? Is when we're all being honest and we feel safe enough to say the things that might be hard, embarrassing, that might be disappointing to the principal or the coach. I think about, and you said there's such joy in this work. I think about when I was a principal for 17 years. And for about 10 of them, I'd get so annoyed because I would hear things like, that's why you make the big bucks. And I'd be so annoyed. And one day, I'm telling you, and I'm clicking my fingers here, I thought that's not what they're saying at all. It's not about money. They're saying they need help. They're saying, I need someone who might have more expertise than me, who might have more connections, who might be able to help me with this. So even phrases or words that we dismiss might really be telling us something. And I think that's probably the root of the work you're doing. Not only are you listening, but you're saying, how does this feel? Where do we need to get? How can it be fun? How can it fulfill us? And how can, what are the action steps for that? My question, this is going to be a really difficult one. And then we're going to get to your new book because that's why we're here. Principals struggle with teachers that don't want to change. The teachers that say it's fine. What, why are you asking me to do something differently or to improve? As a coach, when you're wearing your coach hat and you're working with a teacher who doesn't see a need to evolve or adjust or adapt, I'm being very, very careful not to use the word improve because I think most teachers give everything they have. How do you coach through that, Elena? How the reluctant teacher?
Okay, I'll reframe what you
Okay,
said because it's a critical place to shift.
good.
Principals struggle, you said principals struggle with teachers that don't want to change. And I'll reframe that to say principals struggle with fear,
Mm-hmm.
with the fear that teachers experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the number one question I get about coaching is, how do you deal with the resistant teacher? And I think what you're describing is, you said the teachers that, don't want to change or evolve, adjust, or adapt. And so those are the ones that sometimes we label resistant. And I would say what we are dealing with in those teachers is fear. And
Mm-hmm.
the more that we as humans learn to work with fear, the more powerful we'll be. So fear is a very important and very useful human emotion. We don't want to get rid of it. We want to learn to recognize it and respond to it. And there's so many strategies that we can use. So when you encounter a teacher who doesn't seem to want to change, there are so many strategies. There's actually a chapter in my new book called how to coach resistance and resilience. And so there's not just how do we respond to fear, but also how do we lead people into resilience, which is the ability to respond to change or adversity and this is something that there are really so many strategies that we can immediately start to implement. So let me also rewind to something you said about your blood pressure dropping. So that could have been in part because a lot of the work I do is informed by neuroscience and psychology and sociology and anthropology. But one concept from neuroscience that's incredibly empowering to understand is that there are these things in our brains called mirror neurons. We pick up on other people's emotions, even just by listening to a podcast or through video or Zoom, we pick up on other people's emotions. We pick up on them even more powerfully when we're in person with them. This is a science thing. And I often say we can either work with science or we can fight against it. So when you show up with someone and you, as the principal or the coach, you are calm, you are present, you're not afraid of their fear. In fact, you're curious about their fear. You're curious about the part of them that doesn't want to change. That's fear in them. When you show up curious, you're open to it, you're not afraid of it, they will pick up on that. They will become less afraid of their fear. And so I'm kind of wanting to name that there's a lot that goes on within us as leaders that influences what happens. And in a lot of the work I do, I talk about working within our sphere of control. What is within our control as leaders, as principals, as coaches, as humans is our emotions. To a great extent, our emotions are within our control, definitely within our influence. Our thoughts, our beliefs. I mean, this is both scary and liberating. Like, we can choose our thoughts, which is scary because, like, do we want to keep saying things and thinking things that externalize our power? And that, well, you know, the phrase that you heard, that's why you make the big bucks. That's an externalization of power. That's saying you've got something
Right.
that they don't have.
Right.
And so we can start with what we can control. So how do we deal with those kinds of teachers who seem like they don't want to change or they're really afraid? We get really clear on what's within our control. We get curious, we get compassionate. We remember the times that we have felt that way. We connect to our own sense of fear about change. It's a very normal human thing to be afraid of change. So how do we create the conditions in which people can reflect on what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're acting? How do we normalize the fact that change is hard? How do we scaffold people into change? Because then there's really specific, I do get very concrete in my new book and in my work about working within someone's ZPD in terms of talking about change, in terms of scaffolding, in terms of using the same approaches we use with children, thinking about a gradual release of responsibility when working with adults. And so getting concrete and specific about what needs to change and exploring the teacher's entry points into their willingness and exploring how we can make it meaningful and relevant to them to engage in those changes, and then facilitating that change.
And leaving the fear behind. You know, as you were talking, I was imagining, I think I've done approximately 87,000 evaluation observation meetings, most of them fine, right? But there were some, you're right. Not only did I come with fear, but so did the teacher. And so you have two people looking across the table at each other, both coming from a place of fear. The teacher thinking, well, what am I going to be told and how am I going to be mandated to change? The principal thinking, I've got to get this teacher to somewhere else. And with that, I think there's layers of respect or lack thereof, um, and curiosity. I love that you use that word because when we come, you know, think about how we talk about children. Tell me about your weekend. Tell me why you chose that behavior. Tell me what you meant here when you wrote that. That's all curiosity, right? And so fear, it seems to me, is such a conversation stopper. And and I love that you reframed my question to allow us to talk about that. And you mentioned your book. Tell me about this. I want to know, all of your books have been really transformational. And so the title, Arise, the Art of Transformational Coaching, I really want our listeners to know what they're going to get when they go out and buy this book.
Yes, I'm so excited about this book, and it's coming out in the end of July 2024. And if you pre-order, you get all kinds of bonuses. And so this is something authors have to do, is to get people to
I know.
pre-order. So I would say this is everything I've learned in 30 years about helping people learn. And it contains hundreds of specific concrete strategies that anyone can use if they are in the business of helping other people learn and grow, and specifically helping adults learn and grow. So this could be within a coaching context, but I often say anytime you put on the hat of you are a teacher on staff, or you are my child, or you are whomever it could be. There are people in the nonprofit and corporate world who use my work. Anytime you're putting on the hat of, I want to help you reflect on what you're doing and grow, you can use coaching strategies. You don't have to be a coach to coach. And so this book contains hundreds of very specific, concrete things that you can say and do. There's a chapter called 50 Questions to Ask. But it also contains these layers of that make the approach much more holistic of how do you respond to fear. And so this is a specific emotion that I'm really committed to helping us understand and learn to work with and recognize and actually kind of get excited about, even like that insight of like, ooh, I'm coming into this meeting with fear and you're here and you've got some fear too. Like, ooh, what can we learn about this, rather than there's all this fear here, right? Because then we have fear of the fear. But actually saying like, ooh, there's something for us to learn here. What can we learn about what this means about our commitment to students? A lot of times fear shows up when we're afraid that we're not going to be able to be who we want to be, do what we want to do, have the kind of impact we want to have, create the kind of meaning we want to have. And so there's learning for us there. And so this book is for anybody who wants to better understand themselves, better understand other humans, have deeper relationships and connections. Ultimately, for anyone who wants to think about how to create thriving communities, my work is really towards the ultimate goal of helping individuals and communities learn how to thrive, because I think that is what we all want. And that can sound perhaps ambiguous or lofty, or sort of like one of these throwaway phrases that we hear all the time, like, we just want to thrive. But I really break down, what does that mean and how do we do it? I'm really interested in the science behind how we do things, the science of change, the science, as I said, of the brain, and working with that and using it. And so while I frame a lot of the book around how we can respond to core human needs, it's very actionable.
And for our listeners, when you go to order this book, or pre-order the book, you will see it's a beautiful image of a sun rising and a bright blue background, a very hopeful set of colors, and kind of brings you in. What I'm hearing you say, Elena, is this is not just for an instructional coach who's working with some teachers. This is for whole organizations. This is for principals. This is for first-year mentor teachers. This is for anyone who works with others. Your subtitle is Proven Strategies to Change Conversations and Organizations. And I find it compelling that the goal is to change conversations and organizations, because one is a, an action, so to speak, and the other is a structure, so to speak.
Mhm.
But if you work together, if you can merge those two, then you have the transformation.
Mm. I also think our conversations are a microcosm for our organizations. I can tell when I consult with an organization and I walk in and I can hear one conversation between two stakeholders, and I can tell you so much about their organization, about the health, about the power dynamics, about how decisions are made. I can hear that in one conversation.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
when we change our conversations, we change our organizations. And this is a lot of the work I do is also, as I said, influenced by the science of change and organizational change and systems thinking and systems theory. And so I work in that. uh, I get a lot of people, coaches and teachers and folks and principals, who are frustrated about the bigger picture and how do we make change and how can I do this when the district this or when I'm told to do that. And
Mhm.
I say, yes, we need to change the systems, and let's start with what is most within our sphere of control or influence. And those are our conversations. That's how we listen. That's how we show up. That's what we're thinking. And we can change those, and we can change the bigger systems at the same time. And so, yeah.
That's just so exciting. I can't wait to get this book. And to Principal Matters listeners, you can pre-order it now on Amazon. Anywhere else. Well, how about I ask it this way, Elena? How can our listeners find you? Not only your book, but the body of work that you've put together. How can they find you and learn more about you?
So my website is the starting place. Perhaps that's brightmorningteam.com. I also have a podcast. That's the Bright Morning Podcast. I send out a weekly newsletter, which has new pieces of information and information about our free webinars and things like that. But the website is a good place to start. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, but that's a good place to start.
Okay. Great. Well, it has been so fun to talk to you. And we started the conversation, listeners, offline, saying how Elena is coming to do some work in my state in a couple weeks. And so I'm so excited to put these two experiences together and learn more from Elena. So if you didn't have a pen nearby, if you're listening to this podcast as you're driving to work, don't worry. The show notes on William D. Parker's website, Principal Matters, will have all the links to Elena's book, to her website, to where you can pre-order, the pre-order bonuses, and a list of her other books as well. So everything you need to know about Elena will be there. So Elena, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation, and I love any conversation that starts about a promise to listen. So I had a wonderful time listening to you today.
Thank you so much. This was a great
Thank you. That was a great conversation. Okay, everyone, have a great week, and tune in for any of our past Principal Matter podcasts on William D. Parker's website or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you, everyone.
You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.